The third arrangement came back at 9:17 on a Tuesday morning. I knew the exact time because I had spent most of my adult life in rooms where somebody cared about numbers like 9:17, and apparently that habit survived. Unemployment, professional humiliation, and 12 weeks behind the counter of my sister's flower shop. The arrangement itself looked excellent. That was not wounded pride talking. I had spent nearly 20 years designing things people paid embarrassing amounts of money to look at. Hotel lobbies, restaurant identities, product launches. Once, an entire line of luxury soap whose packaging required 6 months of meetings and 3 arguments about the emotional implications of beige. I knew composition. The white lilies rose at 3 deliberate heights. Pale roses softened the center. Eucalyptus gave the whole thing enough movement to keep it from looking rigid. The ceramic container was understated, the proportions were clean, and Thomas Avery had sent it back. Again. The bell above Bellwether's front door rang, and I looked up expecting one of his employees. Thomas came in, carrying the arrangement himself. At 47, he had the kind of face that looked more severe from a distance than it actually was. Dark hair beginning to gray at the temples, straight nose, strong mouth. A charcoal suit that fit well enough to suggest somebody had once made him buy it properly, even if he would have preferred not to think about clothes at all. He set the flowers on my counter. I folded my arms. Let me guess. Too tall. No. Too white. No. The eucalyptus is emotionally inappropriate. His mouth moved slightly. It took me a second to realize Thomas Avery was suppressing a smile. It's beautiful, he said. I waited. That's the problem. I looked at the flowers, then at him. You returned a funeral arrangement because it's too beautiful. I returned it because it could be for anybody. It's a sympathy arrangement. It's for Harold Holloway. Thomas waited as though the distinction should have explained itself. I don't know Harold Holloway. Exactly. Thomas, I make the flowers. You handle the biography. He hated lilies. I looked down at the 12 white lilies currently dominating the arrangement. He grew tomatoes beside his garage every summer for 38 years, and never once produced a decent one. His wife kept telling him to stop. He kept planting them. That is very touching. It is also not information anyone put on the order form. He wore green work shirts even after he retired, because he liked the pockets. He thought roses were too fussy. His daughter says he cut branches off their forsythia every March, and brought them into the kitchen before they were ready. I looked at the arrangement again. It suddenly did look generic. I disliked him for that. Not for being right. For making me see it. So what do you want me to do? Thomas glanced at the flowers. Make something Mrs. Holloway will recognize. She ordered flowers, not a personality assessment. She ordered something for her husband's funeral. And you expect me to reconstruct a dead man from foliage? No. He met my eyes. I expect you to ask. That irritated me enough that I followed him next door. Avery and Sons Funeral Home occupied the building immediately east of Bellwether, close enough that Thomas could probably have rejected my work by opening a window if either building had windows on the shared wall. The name had always struck me as misleading. I had seen no Sons. Mostly I had seen Thomas, 2 other funeral directors, several attendants, and an older receptionist named Gwen, who had already learned that bringing me peppermint candy was the fastest way to get priority on last-minute orders. Thomas led me through a quiet hallway and stopped outside a consultation room. You can listen, he said. I'm delighted to have permission. You're less charming when you're annoyed. That sounds unlikely. This time I saw the smile. It disappeared when he opened the door. A woman in her 50s sat at the table with a stack of papers in front of her. Her eyes were swollen, but she was composed in the brittle way people sometimes are when they have been forced to make too many decisions in too few hours. Thomas introduced me only as Julian from Bellwether, helping with the flowers. Then he sat across from her. He did not ask what Harold's favorite flower had been. He asked, "What did your father complain about every summer?" The woman blinked. Then she laughed. It was brief and surprised, and immediately followed by tears. His tomatoes, Thomas nodded. He was terrible at them. Absolutely terrible. He'd bring them inside like trophies, and my mother would throw half of them away when he wasn't looking. What color did he wear when your mother wanted him to dress nicely? The woman covered her mouth. Oh God, that awful green. Work shirts? Yes. He bought 6 of the same one. Thomas glanced at me once, not triumphantly, That would almost have been easier. He was simply giving me the information I had failed to request. By the time we returned to Bellwether, I knew Harold Holloway better than I had known most of the clients whose brands I had helped sell to millions of people. I removed every lily. I kept some of the eucalyptus, added loose green amaranthus, yellow spray roses instead of formal long-stemmed ones, and branches that gave the arrangement a shape slightly less controlled than I normally preferred. I found a small bundle of unripened tomato vine from a local grower who owed Rebecca a favor, and worked it low into the arrangement where it looked almost accidental. It was objectively less elegant than the first version. I liked it more. Thomas came back a little after 2. He stood in front of the counter without speaking. I discovered that I hated waiting for his opinion. That annoyed me even more than the returned lilies. Well? He leaned closer, studying the arrangement. Then he straightened. That one belongs to somebody. 5 words. That was all I got. He picked it up and walked out. I stood behind the counter feeling absurdly pleased. By Friday, Thomas had personally delivered 4 more orders. On the 5th, I looked at the sheet he placed in front of me, then at the funeral home visible through my front window. You know you have employees. So do you. Mine are busy. So are mine. Your building is 30 feet away. 27. I narrowed my eyes. You measured? No. Gwen did. That sounded plausible. I looked down at the order, and there was absolutely nobody available to bring this over except the owner? Thomas put one hand into his trouser pocket. They don't argue as well. I looked up. That sounds dangerously close to a compliment. It has structural problems. You're talking to a former branding consultant. I can fix those. I've heard. He started toward the door. I should have let him go. Instead, I said, Thomas. He turned. What do you do when you're not working? The question surprised both of us. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. I'm not sure I understand. That is a concerning answer. I understand the words. What do you do on a Sunday when nobody needs you? His mouth tightened, not with offense exactly, but with the discomfort of somebody who had been asked for a document he had not prepared. People generally need me on Sundays. That wasn't the question. Thomas looked at me for another second. Then the front door opened behind him, saving him from answering. Gwen entered carrying a stack of empty metal flower stands. Thomas immediately reached for all of them. You can take 2, she told him. I've got them. You very clearly don't. He took 4 anyway. One shifted under his arm. I stepped around the counter and reached for it. His response was instant. I've got it. Not angry, not sharp, automatic. I stopped. Something about that reflex interested me more than it should have. Gwen gave me a look over his shoulder that suggested this was familiar territory. Thomas adjusted the stands and headed for the door. See you Monday, he said. Probably before then, if your employees continue their mysterious inability to cross the sidewalk. He glanced back. There was that almost smile again. Probably. For the first time since Rebecca had handed me the keys to Bellwether, I realized I had gone almost an entire day without thinking about what came after the shop. That evening, I stayed late, rebuilding the weekly sales sheet. Some habits were less interested in personal growth than others. At 7:43, the phone rang. Rebecca, if you're calling to ask whether I fixed the delivery margins, I have excellent news. I wasn't. Her voice was different. I sat back. What happened? Nothing bad. That phrase has never once made anybody calmer. Rebecca, a company contacted me this afternoon. The regional group I told you about a few months ago. I remembered them vaguely. 6 floral stores across 3 cities. Weddings, events, corporate accounts. What do they want? They asked if I'd consider selling Bellwether. My eyes moved around the shop. The old pressed tin ceiling Rebecca had refused to replace. The wooden drawers behind the counter with handwritten labels from an owner before her. 3 buckets waiting to be cleaned in the sink. The work table where Harold Holloway's second arrangement had forced me to admit I still had things to learn. I answered before I had time to think about it. You told them no, right? Rebecca said nothing, and in that silence, I heard something I had not expected at all. Relief. Relief? I said. Don't make it sound criminal. You sounded relieved. I am relieved. I looked around Bellwether again, as if the shop might somehow defend itself. You built this place. I know. You spent 11 years building it. I also spent 11 years not taking vacations. That is not the same thing. No, Julian. It's exactly the point. I pushed my chair back. So you want to sell? I want to hear the offer. You already know how regional groups work. They buy the name, consolidate purchasing, reduce staff, turn everything into the same inventory. Did you actually read their last acquisition report? No. Then maybe don't redesign the funeral before the patient is dead. I almost laughed despite myself. That metaphor is offensive on several levels. I've been spending too much time around hospital administrators. Rebecca had accepted a permanent position overseeing outpatient operations at a hospital 2 states away. Originally, she had described it as temporary. Then she described Bellwether as something we would figure out. Then I had arrived with 3 spreadsheets, a new inventory system, and enough unrequested opinions to qualify as a hostile takeover. I thought you wanted me to stabilize the shop. I did. So I'm stabilizing it. You're re-engineering it. That sounds better. It isn't always. There was no accusation in her voice, which made the comment harder to dismiss. What if the numbers improve enough that selling doesn't make sense? Then we look at that. What if I can reduce waste another 12%? Then I will be genuinely impressed by your ability to make dead hydrangeas more profitable. You say that now, Jules. I stopped. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "It was my shop. I'm aware. So why are you more sentimental about selling it than I am?" I'm not sentimental. Of course not. I'm being rational. You said you told them no, right? Before asking what they offered. That was a preliminary reaction. It was panic. I do not panic. You alphabetized my ribbon inventory. That was necessary. It was sorted by color. Exactly. She laughed. I did not. Rebecca softened. I'm not asking you to save Bellwether. I know. I mean it. I heard you. No. You heard words, and immediately started building a strategy around them. I looked through the front window at Avery and Sons. The lights downstairs were still on. You asked me to keep this place running until you decided what to do. And you did. Better than I expected, actually. Your faith in me remains overwhelming. I knew you could run it. I just didn't know whether you could run it without trying to turn it into an international floral conglomerate. That was phase 2. Rebecca laughed again. Then her voice changed. I'm happy here, Julian. At the hospital, yes. The answer came without hesitation. That should have settled something. Instead, I felt irritated with it. I'm good at the work. I like the people. I like going home and not worrying whether a refrigerated shipment will fail at 2 in the morning. I don't miss weddings. I don't miss negotiating with people who suddenly believe pale peach is a human rights issue. That only happened twice. 3 times. Mrs. Feldman was under pressure. She threatened a florist with litigation over ranunculus. She was committed. Rebecca sighed. Just let me get the offer. Fine. Fine as in you agree? Fine as in I acknowledge that you are legally allowed to sell your own business. That is almost growth. Don't get ambitious. By Wednesday, Thomas had accepted 2 arrangements without modification. On Thursday, he accepted 3. I told myself this reflected improved process. It did not explain why I began recognizing the sound of the funeral home's front door opening through Bellwether's glass. Thomas came over just before lunch carrying a request for a memorial service. I took the sheet from him. Tell me about her. He leaned against the counter. Evelyn Ross, 76, retired elementary school teacher. That tells me almost nothing. Good. I looked up. He had done that deliberately. What did she hate? Roses. Excellent woman. She also disliked carnations. Now she's becoming unreasonable. She collected ceramic birds. Specific species? Mostly cardinals. Favorite color? Her son says red, but her daughter says she only wore navy. Which one is right? Thomas considered it. Both, probably. I wrote it down. What did she do when she was angry? His eyebrows lifted. That's new. I'm innovating. Her daughter says she cleaned. Anything? Baseboards. I looked at him. Thomas nodded gravely. Every family develops its own vocabulary for fear. I stopped writing. He seemed not to notice what he had said. Or perhaps he noticed and wished he had not. What's yours? His eyes shifted to mine. My what? Vocabulary for fear. I don't think that information appears on the order form. That sounded familiar. He straightened. I have a service in 20 minutes. Convenient. Extremely. He left. But he came back an hour later with the excuse of checking whether I had enough red stock. We both knew he could have called. By Friday, I had begun noticing things I had not meant to notice. Thomas disliked sweet coffee, but drank it anyway when grieving families handed him a cup. He loosened his tie the second he crossed the threshold into Bellwether. He answered every work call before the third ring. When Gwen asked whether he had eaten, he always said yes too quickly. He remembered that I preferred using the rear work table because customers at the front counter could watch my hands, and he never once allowed anyone to carry something for him if he could physically manage it himself. We were not friends. That would have required an agreement I did not remember making, but we had developed a rhythm. He brought information. I challenged his assumptions. He challenged mine. Somewhere in the middle, funeral arrangements stopped feeling like assignments and started feeling like puzzles built around actual people. That afternoon, Thomas entered while I was trimming stems for Evelyn Ross's arrangement. I heard about the offer, he said. I did not ask how. Bellwether and Avery and Sons shared employees, customers, delivery drivers, and approximately 6 square feet of neighborhood privacy. Rebecca told Gwen? Rebecca told me. That made me look up. When? She called this morning about her standing funeral account contract and happened to mention she may sell. Yes. I turned back to the flowers. Well, before you begin, I already know what you're going to say. Thomas was silent. I glanced at him. That seems efficient, he said. You're going to tell me regional companies kill neighborhood businesses, that Bellwether has been here too long to become some standardized extension of a chain, that people come here because Rebecca knows who they are. Thomas folded his arms. Anything else? You'll probably make a point about history. I do enjoy history. And then you'll say that some things matter more than the highest offer. He waited until I finished. Actually, I was going to tell you to look at the offer. The stem in my hand snapped. I stared at him. You think she should sell? I think she should consider selling. You complain when people use generic sympathy flowers, but you're fine with a regional company buying the shop next door? Those things are unrelated. They are obviously related. How? Because this place matters. I didn't say it doesn't. Then why are you telling her to sell it? I'm not telling Rebecca anything. She already told me what she wants. That stopped me. Thomas continued more carefully. She likes her new job. I know. She doesn't want to come back. She said that? She didn't need to. I laughed once. There. That. What? You decide what people mean before they finish saying it. His expression changed. Not defensively. Attentively. I should have noticed that. Instead, I kept going. Rebecca built this from nothing. Yes. She spent 11 years here. Yes. And now you think she should hand it over because someone made a decent offer? I think 11 years of wanting something does not require a 12th. The shop seemed unusually quiet. You keep calling Bellwether her dream after she's told you she's done dreaming it. Something in my chest tightened. I disliked the sentence immediately. Not because it was cruel, because I understood it. That's convenient. For whom? For you. If she sells, none of this becomes complicated. Thomas's face went still. I had gone too far, although I was not yet willing to admit it. He did not retaliate. Instead, he asked, "Are you trying to save the shop for Rebecca?" I felt my jaw tighten. Who else would I be doing it for? That's what I'm asking. On my desk sat the numbers I had spent 2 months improving. Reduced spoilage, better delivery margins, new event inquiries, a revised website. Every problem transformed into a measurable thing I could solve. Thomas's voice was quieter when he spoke again. You lost a job you were good at. The merger eliminated my division. I know. So you came here 3 weeks later and immediately found something else that needed fixing. My irritation sharpened. You're welcome to stop using the improved ordering system. I'm not criticizing the system. You're doing a remarkable impression. Thomas shook his head. I'm saying maybe Bellwether doesn't need rescuing just because you need something you can rescue. For once, I had no answer ready. Thomas seemed to recognize that and did something unexpected. He stopped. No explanation, no reassurance, no attempt to finish the thought for me. He simply picked up the memorial order. I'll see you tomorrow. Then he left. I stayed in the shop after closing. The acquisition documents Rebecca had forwarded were open on my laptop. Beside them sat my own 12-week recovery plan, revenue targets, inventory changes, staff scheduling, new corporate accounts. At the top of Rebecca's original note from the day she handed me the keys, she had written one sentence. Keep it running until I figure out what I want to do. I had somehow translated that into, make it impossible to leave. At 8 the next morning, I arrived to find Thomas standing outside Bellwether before I had unlocked the door. He held no order form, no flower stands, no funeral paperwork. What happened? Nothing. That phrase is having a terrible week. He looked almost amused, but there was tension underneath it. I need a favor. I unlocked the door. What kind? Thomas followed me inside. For once, it isn't something I know how to do better than you. His favor turned out to involve folding tables, 6 mismatched vases, and a neighborhood remembrance event that had somehow become his responsibility despite, according to him, not technically being in charge. The event was held every spring in the courtyard behind the old community center, 3 blocks from Bellwether. Families brought photographs of people they had lost. Some came every year, some came once and never returned. There was no formal service, no speeches, unless someone wanted to make one, and no expectation that grief had to look dignified. Thomas had been asked to handle the flowers. That part, apparently, terrified him. You arrange flowers for funerals every day. I coordinate them. You tell people what they mean. I help people make decisions. You tell me when mine are wrong. That has happened considerably less often lately. I tried not to enjoy that. Thomas stood at the center work table while I unpacked buckets of stock. What's the problem? No family. For the event. Yes. So, there's nobody specific to design for. I smiled. Thomas narrowed his eyes. You find this amusing. Deeply. I'm glad my professional limitations are restorative for you. You finally have to make something without knowing exactly what everyone needs. I know what the event needs. Then why are you here? He ignored that. We should keep it restrained. No. He looked at me. No? You asked for help. I asked for expertise. My expertise says you don't get to be professionally useful tonight. His face changed. That sentence doesn't mean anything. It means, stop solving. I'm not solving. You've already reorganized my buckets twice. They were inefficient. They're flowers. They can still be inefficient. I laughed. Thomas did not, but his mouth betrayed him. I moved one of the buckets deliberately back to where he had moved it from. He watched. That's childish. It's therapeutic. For whom? Mostly me. We spent the next hour choosing flowers, without a single deceased person to anchor them. Thomas hated it. That was the first thing I learned. He was comfortable with constraints. Names, stories, traditions, specific requests. Give him a grieving family with 6 conflicting opinions, and an uncle who believed carnations were disrespectful, and Thomas became calm enough to lower everyone else's pulse. Give him freedom, and he became suspicious. He picked up a stem of blue delphinium, put it down, selected white stock, rejected it, then returned to the delphinium. You know there isn't a wrong answer. There are always wrong answers. That explains a great deal. He looked at me. What does that mean? Nothing. Julian. I adjusted a vase. No, tonight I'm practicing restraint. You're terrible at it. So are you. That stopped him. For a few seconds, neither of us touched anything. Then Thomas leaned against the table. You asked me last week what I do on Sundays. I remember. I usually work. That was already obvious. If I'm not working, I do laundry. I stared at him. That cannot be the entire answer. I sometimes buy groceries. Thomas. What? I am trying to imagine the man behind the funeral suit, and you are giving me detergent. That is what happens when you ask dangerous questions. I smiled despite myself. All right, music. What about it? What do you listen to? He hesitated. That tiny hesitation pleased me more than it should have. Old soul. Specific. Marvin Gaye. Otis Redding. Al Green. I looked at him. What? I was expecting something aggressively respectable. String quartets. Public radio. I contain multitudes. You contain laundry. He laughed then. Actually laughed. It changed his face so completely that I forgot what I had intended to say next. Thomas noticed. The laugh faded, but not the softness around his eyes. I turned back to the flowers before the moment could become too obvious. What about you? Music? Yes. Everything when I'm working. Nothing when I'm thinking. That sounds exhausting. It is. Near sunset, we carried the finished vases to the community center. Thomas tried to take 3 at once. I blocked him with my arm. No, I can carry them. I know. Then move. No. His expression sharpened. Julian, you asked me for help. With the flowers. This is physically adjacent to flowers. I've got them. There it was again. The reflex. Immediate. Automatic. I took one vase anyway and waited. Thomas looked at my hand, then at me. Something passed over his face. Irritation first, then recognition. He let go. It was such a small thing that another person might not have noticed it. I did. The event itself was quieter than I expected. People arrived carrying framed photographs. Children ran between chairs. An elderly man spent 20 minutes telling Thomas a story about his wife's terrible driving, while Thomas listened as though there were nowhere else he needed to be. Near the end of the evening, Thomas and I sat on the low stone wall at the edge of the courtyard. Someone had left paper cups of lemonade on a table nearby. Thomas had loosened his tie. "You were right," he said. I looked at him. "I need that recorded. Don't ruin it. Too late." He nodded toward the flowers. "They didn't need a central idea. That must be devastating. I'm processing privately." We sat in silence for a while. It was not awkward. That surprised me. Thomas looked across the courtyard, where volunteers were beginning to collect chairs. My father hated events like this. Why? He thought grief should be private. Did you? I thought whatever kept him from arguing with me was probably correct. He gave a short breath that almost counted as a laugh. He got sick when I was 36. Cancer? Yes. How long? 3 years. I ran the funeral home. Took him to appointments. Handled his medications. Managed the house when he couldn't. Made sure my mother ate. And worked? Of course. I looked at him. What? You say of course, about things that are obviously insane. They weren't insane at the time. That's usually when they're most effective. Thomas looked down at his hands. For the first time since I had met him, he seemed uncertain about what to do with them. Who took care of you? He did not answer immediately. The courtyard sounds continued around us. Metal chair legs against stone. A child laughing near the gate. Somebody folding a table. Finally, Thomas said, "Nobody." I waited. Then he added, "I didn't let them. That was different. If somebody helped, I had to explain what I needed. If I did it myself, I didn't. And eventually people stopped offering. There was no self-pity in his voice. That made it worse. I understood the mechanism too well. Different material, same architecture. When my company merged, they offered me another position. Thomas turned to me. "You said your division was eliminated." "It was." "What position?" "Senior creative manager." "That sounds like the job you had." "It wasn't. It was smaller. Less authority. Different reporting line. They said it was temporary, until the restructuring settled." Thomas did not speak. I walked out before they could formally move me. "Because you didn't want the role. That's what I told everyone." "And the other reason?" Normally that question would have irritated me. This time it didn't. I didn't want to be demoted. Thomas waited. I exhaled. "No, that's not right." He still said nothing. I didn't want anyone to see me except being demoted. There it was. Ugly enough to be true. Thomas nodded once. Not approval. Recognition. For once, he did not tell me what it meant. By the time we returned to Bellwether, it was after 9. The shop was dark except for the lights over the back work table. Thomas helped me carry the empty buckets inside. Without argument. Progress. I set the last one down. He was standing closer than necessary. Neither of us moved away. Thomas started to speak. "You know, the way you reacted to losing the firm." I closed my eyes. He stopped. When I opened them again, he looked almost guilty. "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Turning me into something you can explain." His mouth closed. I stepped closer. Thomas did not. That mattered. He simply stayed where he was, watching me, waiting. For once, he had no answer prepared, so I kissed him. There was nothing accidental about it. Nothing rushed either. His hand came to my side, then stopped there, light enough that I could have moved away without resistance. I didn't. When we separated, Thomas looked at me for several seconds. "Well," he said. I almost laughed. "That's all you've got?" I'm trying very hard not to interpret the moment. "That may be the most romantic thing you've said to me. Give me time." "So this happened." "Yes." "We're not pretending tomorrow that it didn't." "No." "We're also not deciding what it means tonight." Thomas considered that. "I can manage that. I'm not completely convinced." "That seems fair." He kissed me again. Later, after Thomas left, I checked my phone. There was an email from Rebecca. The regional buyer had submitted a revised offer. The number at the top was high enough that I read it twice. At the bottom of the letter was one sentence: decision requested within 5 business days. I spent the next morning trying to prove the offer was less attractive than it looked. That was how I knew it was attractive. The regional company had improved nearly every term Rebecca cared about. They would keep Bellwether's 5 full-time employees for at least a year. They would assume the remaining lease. They wanted to keep the name during a transition period instead of replacing it immediately with their own. The purchase price was good, not insulting good, actually good. I built a spreadsheet anyway, then another one. By noon, I had created 3 financial scenarios, 2 risk assessments, and a list titled, "Questions They Are Probably Hoping We Don't Ask." Rebecca called while I was adding a 4th column. "You're doing the thing." What thing? The thing where a decision becomes a hostage situation until every possible variable has surrendered. I'm conducting due diligence. You created a 15-year revenue model for a shop I don't want to own next year. 11 years of sales data is statistically irresponsible. You're impossible. Then she said, "I want to sell." I stopped typing. There was no uncertainty in her voice. No grief disguised as practicality. No request for me to rescue her from a decision she was afraid to make. I know. Do you? Yes. And I looked around Bellwether. The morning delivery had arrived an hour earlier. Buckets of fresh stock lined the back wall. Someone had left floral wire beside the register instead of returning it to the correct drawer, an offense that would normally have demanded immediate intervention. I left it there. "I think we should accept." Rebecca did not speak. "I'm still reviewing the employment provisions." She laughed. That sounded physically painful. It was unpleasant. "You okay?" I considered lying. Instead I said, "Ask me after I sign." Thomas was between services when I crossed next door that afternoon. Gwen pointed me toward his office without asking why I was there. His office was smaller than I expected. Desk, filing cabinets, one bookshelf, a framed photograph of an older couple I assumed were his parents. No decorative objects except a ceramic bowl filled with paper clips. "You own an entire funeral home. And this is the bleakest office I've ever seen." Thomas looked up from his computer. "You came over to critique the interior? I have professional standards. I've seen your apartment. You have not. I'm extrapolating." I closed the door behind me. His expression shifted when he saw my face. "What happened?" "The offer." Thomas leaned back slightly. "Rebecca wants to accept." "And you?" "I'm going to sign." "There," said aloud. The decision felt heavier. Thomas studied me. I hated how quickly I began trying to read his reaction. Disappointment would mean one thing. Relief would mean another. If he asked me to reconsider, I already knew part of me would want him to. Thomas gave me none of those things. "Do you think signing is the right decision?" "Yes." "Then make sure you're signing, because you want whatever comes after, not because you're afraid of what this became." "I don't know what comes after." "That doesn't make this the wrong thing. You really don't want me to keep it." Thomas's face softened. "I want you to stop asking the shop to answer questions it didn't create." I looked down. "Do you rehearse these?" "Extensively." "That makes me feel better." "It shouldn't." I laughed. Then Thomas reached for my hand. Not to guide me, not to stop me. He simply held it. Rebecca and I signed the agreement the next afternoon. Digital signatures. No dramatic boardroom. No ceremonial handing over of keys. I clicked my name into a box beneath 17 pages of language designed to make everything irreversible. Then Rebecca did the same. A confirmation page appeared. That was it. 11 years of her life became a closing schedule, a transition plan, and a transfer date 6 weeks away. I expected relief. Instead, I went into the walk-in cooler and stood there among buckets of flowers until my hands hurt from the cold. Thomas found me 20 minutes later. "You're going to damage the stock." "I'm having an emotional experience. I can see that. Try not to solve it." "I wasn't going to." I looked at him. That pause was suspicious. "I'm learning. I still think it was the right decision." "You can think that and hate it." "That seems inefficient." "Probably." He stood beside me. No advice. No explanation of grief. No reminder that Rebecca wanted the sale. Eventually I moved closer until my shoulder touched his. Thomas let it happen. That evening, we went to dinner. Not because the shop had sold. Not because I needed comforting. We had already planned it. That mattered. Thomas wore a dark blue shirt instead of a suit, which made him look almost alarmingly like a person with hobbies. "What?" he asked when I stared. "I'm adjusting. To you without a tie. You kissed me without one. That was low lighting." He shook his head. The dinner itself was ordinary. We argued about whether dessert menus should be presented before coffee. Thomas confessed to watching terrible renovation shows. I admitted I had once spent an entire weekend rearranging furniture because a sofa was 3 inches off center. "You understand that explains everything," he said. "Nothing explains everything. That may be the healthiest sentence you've said since we met." "Careful," he smiled. For 2 hours, there were no flowers between us. No grieving families. No Rebecca. No acquisition agreement. I realized I liked him without the structure that had introduced us. That should have made the future simpler. It did not. A few days later, Thomas told me he had started interviewing operations managers for Avery and Sons. I thought I had misheard him. "You're delegating?" "I have employees." "And you say that as though you've recently discovered them." "I'm considering restructuring." "What brought this on?" Thomas gave me a look. "I'm attempting not to make you insufferable." "So me." "Not entirely." His father had run the business by being physically present for everything. Thomas had inherited the habit along with the name. He had spent years convincing himself the funeral home worked, because he never stopped working. "I don't want to sell, but I'm not sure ownership needs to mean permanent availability." I smiled. "What?" "Nothing. That smile means something." "I'm practicing restraint. You remain terrible at it." What mattered was that Thomas was not standing still, while I was the only man being asked to choose a different life. The distinction stayed with me. 3 days later, my phone rang while I was cleaning the back work table. The name on the screen belonged to someone I had not spoken with in 8 months. Rachel Klein, former colleague, current partner at one of the fastest-growing branding firms on the East Coast. I answered. 20 minutes later, I was sitting motionless on a stool. Rachel's firm was opening a new division. They wanted someone to lead it, not manage it. Lead it. Hospitality, retail, destination branding. Work I knew. Work I had once loved. The salary was higher than the position I had lost. The authority was real. The office was in Philadelphia. By 4, a formal offer was in my inbox. Thomas came over just before closing. I handed him my phone. He read the message, then read it again. I watched his face, already imagining the possible responses. "Tell me not to go. Tell me this matters. Tell me we matter." Thomas gave the phone back. "You should take this seriously." For the next 4 days, I developed 3 possible futures and hated all of them for different reasons. Future 1 was Philadelphia. Rachel's offer was the kind of job people congratulated you for accepting before you had actually accepted it. The title was good. The money was better. I would build a division instead of inheriting one. I would have a team again, budgets large enough to be irritating, and clients capable of turning the placement of a logo into a moral emergency. Part of me wanted it. That was inconvenient. It would have been much easier if my old profession had suddenly seemed shallow or empty. Then, I could have rejected the offer, stayed where I was, and congratulated myself for becoming a wiser person among flowers. Unfortunately, I had liked my work. Not every day, not every client, but I liked scale. I liked solving complicated problems with talented people. I liked walking into a room where nobody agreed on what something was supposed to become, and leaving with an answer. Future 2 was staying, not bellwether. That decision was already made. Staying meant finding something else. Consulting, freelance work, smaller clients, maybe a local firm if I wanted one. It also meant Thomas. I disliked how quickly his name appeared in that column. Future 3 was doing nothing immediately. Finish the bellwether transition, keep seeing Thomas, let the job offer go, and figure out the rest later. That sounded emotionally flexible and financially irresponsible. Rebecca reviewed my list over dinner at her apartment. She read all 3 futures, put the paper down, and said, "I'm not telling you what to do. I didn't ask you to. You brought me a decision matrix. For context, you ranked emotional variables from 1 to 5. That is not the same as asking." She pointed at me with her fork. "You spent 3 months deciding what I wanted after I told you. Don't ask me to return the favor." I leaned back. That was unnecessarily specific. "You're welcome." She was right, which I had begun to find exhausting in people I loved. Thomas was worse. He refused to give me even the satisfaction of being clearly wrong. When I told him Rachel needed an answer within 10 days, he nodded, as though I had informed him of a shipping deadline. That's soon. I'm aware. Have you talked to her about flexibility? Yes. And she can give me another week. After that, they need to move on. Thomas looked down at the wine glass in his hand. We were at my apartment. Dinner had been finished for almost an hour, but neither of us had made any attempt to leave the table. I waited. He said nothing. Finally, I asked, "Would you miss me?" His eyes lifted. Yes. No hesitation. The answer landed harder because of how simple it was. I waited for something else. Nothing came. That's not the same as asking me to stay. No. Are you going to? Thomas's face became careful. No. I laughed once, without humor. Of course. He sat forward. Julian. What? You asked. And you answered. Yes. Very efficiently. His expression tightened. I don't know what you want me to say. That seems to be going around. I want you here. There it was. My chest tightened before I could stop it. But I'm not going to ask you to turn down a major professional opportunity, because we've been seeing each other for a few weeks. That sounds reasonable. It is reasonable. I know. Then why are you angry? I'm not. Thomas gave me a look. Fine. I'm a little angry. At me? I'm still gathering data. He did not smile. The conversation should have ended there. Instead, it continued in smaller pieces over the next several days. Thomas asked about the firm, then the clients, then the size of the team. At first, I thought he was simply interested. Then I started noticing the language. You've always liked complex work. You'd have more room to grow there. You said yourself you miss leading a team. The city is 2 hours away. That's not impossible. Each statement was true. That was what made them irritating. On Thursday, Thomas sent the day's funeral order through Gwen. Friday, one of his assistants brought 2 more. By Monday, Thomas had not crossed into Bellwether once. When I called him on it, he said, I thought you needed room to think. I didn't ask for room. You have a major decision to make. So you've decided disappearing from the shop is helpful? I'm not disappearing. You are 27 feet away. That remains Gwen's measurement. I did not laugh. Thomas noticed. Julian, I'm trying not to influence you. You are influencing me. How? By turning yourself into something I'm apparently supposed to remove from the calculation. He went quiet. There it was. The thing I had not been able to name. I crossed next door that afternoon. Thomas was in his office. Jacket off, sleeves rolled to his forearms. He looked tired. Good. I was tired too. He closed the file on his desk when I entered. We need to talk. That usually means something pleasant. No interpreting. His mouth tightened. I closed the door. You've already decided what I should do. I have not. Yes, you have. I told you to consider the offer. You told me I like scale. You told me I miss teams. You told me this city may be limiting. You've practically written my acceptance letter. That is not fair. Then tell me I'm wrong. Thomas stood. He looked at me for a long time before speaking. I think there is a real possibility that if you stay here because of me, 6 months from now you will start wondering what you gave up. That's possible. Yes. So is getting hit by a bus. You don't see me designing my life around that. Julian. No. You keep calling this freedom, but you've already decided which choice counts as the larger life. Thomas's face hardened. I will not become the reason you make your life smaller. The sentence hung between us. I felt something in me go still. You don't get to decide which version of my life is smaller. I'm not deciding. You are. You've just found a very elegant way to do it, while pretending you're protecting my agency. That is not what I'm doing. Then ask me what I want. Thomas stared at me. What do you want? I don't know yet. Exactly. The word was immediate. Certain. And that was the moment something broke. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just enough. I stepped back. Thomas saw it. Julian, you think because I don't know yet, you get to know for me. That isn't what I said. It's what you've been doing since the day we met. His face changed. I kept going before I could become reasonable. You knew what grieving families needed. You knew Rebecca was ready to sell before I accepted it. You knew I was trying to rescue Bellwether because I felt useless. And half the time, you were right. Thomas said nothing. That's the problem. What problem? You started believing being right gave you ownership. His jaw tightened. That's not fair. Neither is being loved like a case you've already assessed. The words hurt him. I saw it. I almost took them back. Then Thomas said, quieter, "You can't make this entirely about me." That stopped me. He was right. I hated him for approximately 3 seconds. Then he continued, "You keep waiting for me to ask you to stay." I looked away. "You asked whether I'd miss you. You asked why I wouldn't tell you to reject the job. You keep pushing until I give you an answer you can use." "I'm asking what you feel." "No. You're asking me to make the choice easier." I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Thomas stepped closer, but not too close. "If I ask you to stay, and you stay, then part of the decision belongs to me." I stared at him. "And if it goes badly, you never have to admit you chose it." That one landed. I sat down in the chair opposite his desk. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I said, "Maybe I wanted you to make it easier." Thomas lowered his eyes. "I wanted to make it impossible for you to blame me." There it was. 2 defenses colliding and calling themselves love. I stood. "I need to decide without you." Pain moved across his face. He nodded. "I know." "No. Don't do that." "What?" "Don't tell me you know." Thomas almost smiled. "Almost." "Okay. I'm not punishing you." He started to answer, caught himself, then gave a short nod. "I need space." "How much?" "I don't know." This time, Thomas did not tell me what that meant. For the next 6 days, he stayed next door. No sudden appearance. No flowers sent with messages hidden inside them. No dramatic attempt to change my mind. It would have been easier if he had. Instead, I had exactly what I said I wanted. The decision was mine. On the 4th day, an old hotel client called. They had heard I was independent. Was I? I said not technically. They asked whether I would consider taking a rebranding project directly. The next morning, a restaurant group I had worked with years earlier emailed. Same question. By Friday, I had 2 potential clients, no company, and a spreadsheet I was almost embarrassed to love. Then a broker showed me a small 2nd-floor office 3 blocks from Bellwether. Brick walls, tall windows, 1 conference room, enough space for 4 people, maybe 5. Nothing impressive, nothing anyone had handed me. The leasing agent stood beside the window while I walked the room a second time. "Do you want the application?" I looked around. There was nobody beside me whose expression I could read. Nobody I could ask whether staying was brave or foolish. Nobody who could make the choice more legitimate by wanting it too. For once, there was only me. "Yes," I said. "Give me the application." The application took 2 days to become a lease. Apparently, landlords were less interested in existential symbolism than credit history, references, and whether I intended to install anything that required additional plumbing. By Monday afternoon, I had signed for 12 months, 3 rooms, 1 conference table I did not yet own, 4 desks I did not yet need, a view of the brick wall across the alley if you stood too close to the east window. I loved it. That was almost enough to frighten me into backing out. Instead, I wired the deposit. Then I called Rachel. She answered on the 2nd ring. "Please tell me this is the call where you finally stop pretending you need more time." "I'm turning it down." Silence. Then, "That was not the sentence I prepared for." "I know." "Money?" "No." "Title?" "No." "Philadelphia?" "Partly." Rachel exhaled. "Did somebody ask you to stay?" There it was. The question I had been trying to prevent from mattering. No. That answer felt clean. Not painless. Clean. "I signed a lease this morning." "For what?" "A small consultancy." Another silence. Then Rachel laughed. "You hated freelancing." I hated being alone in my apartment, designing restaurant menus for people who paid invoices 73 days late. That is freelancing. This will be different. You sound disturbingly optimistic. I have 2 clients lined up. 2? Potentially 3. Julian. I know. This is risky. I know that too. She was quiet for several seconds. Then her tone softened. "You loved leading teams." "I still do." "You were good at it." "I know." "So this isn't you deciding corporate work was secretly evil?" I smiled. "No." "Good." I would have had to hang up. I leaned against the windowsill in the empty office. I think I spent a long time assuming bigger meant more real. Rachel did not answer immediately. When she did, there was no argument in her voice. Then make the small thing real. By Wednesday, I had registered the business, signed one client contract, and discovered that choosing your own future mostly involved paperwork. The romantic version of independence rarely mentions tax IDs. Bellwether's transition continued. The new regional management team began visiting twice a week. They were competent, annoyingly competent. One of them suggested moving the ribbon storage to the opposite wall. I nearly objected on principle. Then I realized it was a better location. Personal growth is humiliating. I did not see Thomas. Not because I avoided Avery and Sons deliberately. The neighborhood was too small for deliberate avoidance to remain elegant. I saw his car. I saw Gwen. I heard the funeral home doors open and close. He respected the distance. Exactly as I had asked. That should have made going back easier. It did not. I learned about the operations manager from Gwen. She came into Bellwether on Thursday to order flowers for a service and said, "Thomas finally hired Mara." I looked up. Mara? Operations director. Starts next month. I tried to sound casual. He actually did it. Gwen smiled in a way that made me feel transparent. He also let James handle the Whitmore consultation alone yesterday. That sounds dangerously like delegation. We're all trying not to frighten him. Thomas had been talking about restructuring before our argument. That mattered. He had not transformed his life to prove something to me. He was doing the work whether I saw it or not. 2 days later, I finished moving the last boxes into my new office. There was still no sign on the door, no finished website, no assistant. I had one borrowed chair because the furniture shipment was late. But the lease was signed. Rachel's job was gone. The decision could no longer be handed back. At 4:30, I walked to Avery and Sons. Gwen looked up from reception when I entered. "He's in his office. Does he know I'm coming?" "No." "Good. Is it?" "I have no idea." "Also good." Thomas's door was open. He was reading something at his desk, jacket draped over the back of his chair. He looked up. For 1 second, neither of us moved. Then Thomas stood. "Hi." "Hi." I closed the door behind me. His eyes followed the movement. I could see questions forming. He did not ask them. That alone almost undid me. I made a decision. Thomas nodded. I waited for him to say he knew. He didn't. I turned down Philadelphia. Something moved across his face. Relief. Fear. Maybe both. I kept going. I signed a lease, 3 blocks from Bellwether. For what? My own firm. "Julian." I lifted a hand. He stopped. "I have 2 signed clients. A 3rd starting next month. Enough runway for at least a year, if I don't suddenly develop expensive taste." "You already have expensive taste." "Not relevant." His mouth moved. "I didn't keep Bellwether. I didn't take the corporate job. And I didn't decide any of it while waiting for you to tell me what the right answer was." Thomas looked down for a moment. When he raised his eyes again, they were quieter. "I'm glad." I braced for more. No advice came. No question about the projections. No warning about risk. Thomas simply stood there. I almost laughed. "What?" "Nothing. That face is not nothing. I'm trying not to ask whether you're sure." I smiled despite myself. "How painful is that?" "More than I'd like to admit." "That seems healthy." "It seems terrible." The silence that followed was different from the one in our argument. Not empty. Unclaimed. Thomas stepped around the desk. He stopped several feet away. Then he said, "Do you want me in the life you chose?" I stared at him. That was all. Not whether I had stayed because of him. Not whether I had considered every risk. Not whether my choice was large enough to satisfy the version of me he had constructed in his head. One question, his place in my life handed back to me. I felt the answer immediately. For once, I did not expect him to recognize it from my face. "Yes," Thomas exhaled. I stepped closer. "But I need you beside me." He waited, not 3 steps ahead, deciding where I'm going and calling it protection. He started to say something, then stopped himself. "I can do that. I also have to stop making you prove you want me by asking you to make decisions I'm afraid to own." His expression softened. "That would help. Don't enjoy this. I'm trying not to. And when you don't know what I want?" I ask. "And when I don't know?" Thomas looked at me. "I believe you." That was the answer. Not because it sounded perfect, because neither of us had been capable of it a month earlier. I reached for him. Thomas met me halfway. The kiss was different from the first one. The first had been discovery. This one was a decision. 3 weeks later, Bellwether no longer belonged to Rebecca. The name remained on the awning, but there were new invoices, new delivery vans, and a manager named Elise, who had already reorganized the cooler more efficiently than I ever had. I resented her for approximately 9 minutes. Then she asked whether I would help with one memorial order. A family I had worked with during the transition wanted something specific. I agreed. Not because flowers had become my destiny, because I remembered the woman. She had kept jars of sea glass in every window of her house and believed purple was depressing. I built the arrangement at the rear work table. Greens, soft amber, small blue accents that caught the light without looking decorative. When I finished, Thomas came over. He had a request form in his hand, but stopped when he saw the flowers. His eyes moved across the arrangement. I knew that look. He had found something he would change. I waited. Thomas opened his mouth, then stopped. I leaned against the table. Well? He looked at me. It isn't mine to correct. I smiled. Good answer. I worked on it. Obviously. He put the order form on the counter. Neither of us moved. Old me would have waited for him to decide what the silence meant. Instead I said, dinner tonight, 7, my place. Thomas smiled. That sounds suspiciously like a decision. It is. I handed him the arrangement. This time, he took it exactly as I made it.